Russian air defenses downed a series of Ukrainian drones in the Kursk region on Friday, along with other regions along the border. It comes as Russia increases the intensity of its drone attacks on Ukraine, which experts say could be part of Moscow's strategy to attack energy infrastructure during the winter. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia's war against his country will end sooner than it otherwise would have done once Donald Trump becomes U.S. president. For some analysis now, we're joined in the studio by our international affairs editor, Rob Parsons. Good to see you, Rob, as always. Let's begin with those comments by Zelensky on Trump. Needless to say, his tone has notably shifted vis-à-vis the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what he said. I mean, he's always been very cautious about painting Donald Trump in overly negative terms, because he has known that there was a possibility that Donald Trump would become president and that he would have to deal with him, that Ukraine would be dependent to a certain degree on Trump's policies towards Ukraine. That is even more the case now that Donald Trump has been elected. Zelensky had a phone conversation just after the election, which he congratulated Donald Trump, and by all accounts had quite a long conversation, detailed conversation about the war in Ukraine and the direction it would move under Donald Trump and what pressure Donald Trump would put on Ukraine and Russia to come to some sort of an agreement. Remember, Donald Trump has always said, I can end this war in 24 hours. One has to assume that was hyperbole from Donald Trump, but certainly he's made it clear he wants to bring the war, if he can, to an end as soon as possible. He would obviously want to take all the praise that would bring along for him as well. So far, what we've heard from Zelensky in this respect is Donald Trump is not as negative towards Ukraine as many have suggested he would be. Zelensky, over the last 24 hours, has repeated again that he's heard nothing from Donald Trump in their conversations that would suggest any sort of negativity from Donald Trump towards Ukraine. What I think he's hoping is that Donald Trump, because he's somebody who constantly says he likes to strike a deal, will put pressure on Russia, and that he knows that if he doesn't put pressure on Russia, he won't get a deal from the Russians that will reflect well on himself. Obviously, the Ukrainians would like a deal that reflects well for them as well. But I think that's what the Ukrainians are hoping, that Donald Trump will understand that unless pressure is put on the Russians, they will go for complete victory. And that will reflect badly on Donald Trump. He'll be seen as a loser, in other words. It's just a sliver, but a glimpse of hope for the Ukrainians. But they truly seem to believe at the moment, Zelensky seems to believe, that with Donald Trump in office, that perhaps, given his personality, he will do more to bring this war to an end quickly than could have been hoped for under Joe Biden. We'll see.
Now, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday. They discussed Ukraine and agreed to remain in contact. How is this being received or perceived by Kyiv?
Pretty negatively, it has to be said. There doesn't seem to have been much conversation, negotiation or discussion between the Germans and the Ukrainians before Olaf Scholz agreed to have this discussion with Vladimir Putin. According to the Russians, it was Scholz who took the initiative to have it. Once the decision had been made by the Germans and the Russians agreed, apparently Scholz did consult then with Zelensky about what areas the discussion would cover. But clearly, Zelensky very unhappy about it, because as far as he's concerned, to use his own words, this opens up a whole Pandora's box about what might happen next. Others may try to follow suit. In other words, up until now, for the last 2 years, Vladimir Putin has found himself an international pariah. He's been isolated. Now that's no longer the case. Talks have started already. Scholz has had that conversation with him. And the fear on the Ukrainian side is that will lead to more of the same. Interesting that in Germany it's been taken quite badly as well. The opposition, which is in a strong position to win the elections, and they come up next year criticising Olaf Scholz on pretty much the same grounds as Zelensky did. Interestingly, too, that Scholz got very little out of this discussion with the Russians. Zelensky saying it's just words, but pretty much seems to have been the case. Vladimir Putin said to him that the reason he invaded Ukraine was because NATO had been pushing to establish a sort of bridgehead inside Ukraine, as he put it, and blamed the war entirely on the West, and said that he had never said no to the possibility of negotiations on a peace deal, but the peace deal would have to reflect Russians' interests, that the territories occupied by Russia would have to be part of the peace deal in favour of Russia. So that's what Scholz got out of this discussion, and Ukraine is not happy about it at all.
Rob, thank you very much indeed, as always.